Morning, everybody. Good to see you again, as it were. Today is the final lecture or talk in the course, and it's going to be focused on Hitchcock's Psycho, and also, talk about some general things, but I think we'll really look at a sequence in detail today. So that, as I've said previously, you get a chance to see what it means to really read a film or interpret a film and get the most from it that you can. So let's go to the PowerPoint. And here, the sequence we're going to look at is, for what I'll try and explain to you, is the most terrifying sequence in Psycho, although that honor is usually reserved, of course, for the shower sequence and the murder of Marion Crane. But I think the conversation that precedes it is actually much more deeply frightening for ways which I'll try to explain. And I begin here with a slide or a shot, a still shot of that conversation, showing you.
Prof, to disturb you, there was someone who shared their screen, so it removed you. Can you share again, please? Everyone, please don't share anything, and also mute your mics and camera, please. Turn off your camera and audio.
Sorry, Lorato, what do you want me to do?
I want you to go to Teams and share your screen again.
Has it stopped?
Yes.
Teams. Is that better? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So here we have a shot showing a friendly, happy conversation between Norman and Marion. And I wanted to bring today's talk under the rubric of a conversation, and to focus on it because, of course, under conditions of lockdown, it's something that so many people are missing, just conversations in person with other people outside the closed family circles that we live in. Conversation is it's a very fundamental part of being human, and that's why I find the sequence of the parlour conversation so particularly disturbing, because in conversation with people we usually feel at ease, comfortable. It's a way of renewing social bonds, of making us feel at home with other people. And it's extremely disturbing when, if in conversations you encounter sort of a deviant relation to conversation. Of course, in technical terms, it's often a mark of a range of disturbances ranging from the minor, kind of obtrusive narcissism, to the extreme of psychotic dislocation and breakdown. And in this conversation from Psycho, we see kind of both in operation, both ordinary conversation, and I'm going to argue alongside that a kind of real psychotic breakdown with conversation implicit in Norman's remarks. As I was thinking about the topic yesterday, a topic I thought about before, but as I thought about it yesterday, I was looking around at things to read, and I came across a very interesting little essay by the linguist Roman Jakobson, which I hadn't read before. And it's an essay that deals with the question of dialogue. And Jakobson is thinking about the German poet Holderlin, who for the last 15 years or so of his life was unable to conduct a conversation with people, but was able still to write a number of fascinating and interesting poems known collectively as the poems of Holderlin's madness. And in his thinking on conversation and dialogue, Jakobson finds a quote from the thinker Heidegger, which I'd like to read to you to kind of emphasize or go into a little bit what I'm saying about the fundamental aspect of conversation and why it is all over the world people are really suffering psychically from the lack of social contact and exchange. There's something very fundamental about what conversation brings to people and how it makes them feel at home in the world. And that is Heidegger's point in his own lectures on Holderlin. We, says Heidegger, we people, we are a dialogue. Man's being is rooted in language, but language really occurs only in dialogue. It's only really activated in dialogue. This, however, is not only a way that language comes to pass, but it's solely as dialogue that language is essential. Any other meaning given to language, that is to say, the idea of language as it's usually understood by linguists as a store of words and rules for the arrangement of words, all that is only a foreground of language. In the background of language, in the depths of language, what it really does is speaking mediates the coming together of people. It brings people together. It nourishes individual subjectivity. It makes it possible. Jakobson then, following this, describes dialogue as mutual address, exchanges with questions and answers, the speaker's achievement and the hearer's attention, the endowment of meaning to one's own utterances, and the ability to grasp those of one's partners. Conversation is kind of society in miniature, and that's why there's something really disturbing about what happens when that begins to break down. If any of you in a lifetime have had experience of talking with disturbed friends or relatives, you know what I'm talking about when I say how disturbing that can be. Poor old Holderlin. He used to love conversation. He called it the blissful give and take, and he explained how his poetry arose from the dialogue with you. But as his illness set on, even his former acquaintances just found his conversations too weird, too depressing, too dull, and too meaningless, and stopped talking to him. Holderlin became altogether heedless of what was said to him. He was there physically. He could make sounds, he could utter words, he could say things, but he wasn't there in person. Nothing is really more disturbing than experiencing that, than seeing that, than being with somebody in the flesh, apparently having a conversation with them, but then finding they're in a different world. as this illness set on, he was very frightened and very anxious. And when asked a question, he'd say, "It's you who say so. It's you who assert this, so nothing can happen to me." So speech and exchange was somehow really, really threatening to him. Instead of saying yes or no in response to questions, he invented his own word, which he'd utter instead. A very strange word, Speakch, he'd say. All in all, as Jacobson puts it, the give and take vanishes from the schizophrenic poet's daily speech. And Jacobson goes on to look at the late poems and see how they're different from the ones written before he entered this phase of profound dislocation and unhappiness. Now, it's that dislocation, some of the aspects of that dislocation, which I find present in what, on the surface, is a seemingly normal conversation between Norman and Marion, and what Hitchcock is so brilliant, along with his screenwriter, who he talked to extensively about it as they were doing it, bringing into view some of the depths of stuff happening in this apparently normal conversation between two people who've just met, who don't know each other, who engage in, that making yourself feel comfortable with someone by, having some banal chit chat, some, completely inconsequential talk. But then if you talk for longer with somebody, what you find is that your conversation cuts deeper. You express more of yourself. You feel able to ask more personal questions. And as this happens, as you move from superficial chit chat to a deeper exchange, the gaps and fissures in Norman's personality begin to appear more strikingly in what he says. Okay, so the sequence which I'm going to ask you to watch is approximately 114 shots. I have somewhere an analysis that I've written of this that does that transcript that I mentioned, and I'm just going to quote selectively from that. In this sequence of 114 shots, you'll find that it divides into three main parts. Shots number 1 to 52, where there's polite conversation, which employs the mechanisms of medium to long shot, reverse shot. 53 to 81 shots, where you get the exchange, you move into an exchange of intimacies, where interestingly the focal length shifts from medium long shot to medium shot to mirror the closer communication. And then you have the breakdown once those intimacies begin to be shared, which take place between 82 and 111, in which there's a very interesting reversal in the structuring of the sequence. At the beginning of the sequence, as you'll see in a moment, Marion is what film critics call the subject of the gaze. It's she who is doing the looking. She is spectating on Norman in ways, which you'll see in a moment. As indeed, Psycho carries on that theme of watching and so on, and being watched, which were present in Rear Window and Vertigo, but with Hitchcock giving a new twist to these dynamics. Shot 112, I argue, is the eruption of Mother's point of view. And then 114, you go into Norman's point of view, where he is now the subject of the gaze and Marion the object. They've switched places after mother has intruded. And you'll see that this structuring, this reversal of dominance from moving from Marion as subject to Marion as object is accompanied by, on the level of the actual conversational exchange, some remarkably disturbing things. Okay, so let's, before doing this, I mean, or as we do this, let's watch the sequence from Psycho, and I'd just like you to pay attention to what I'm describing here as you yourself watch it. First of all, in the sequence, how Marion, first you see them together, but how Marion becomes the subject of the gaze. You as spectator are with her, watching Norman, watching him enter the parlour, looking at the birds, and so on and so forth. But you'll see what I mean in this transcript if you now watch the sequence.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wish you could apologize for other people.
Don't worry about it. But as long as you're fixed to supper, we may as well eat it.
It might be nicer and warmer in the office.
Now, what I mean is that from that initial dialogue between them, we are now with Marion as she walks to the office, and in the office, the parlour, and we share her perspective and point of view as we enter that room. And it's in the first part of the sequence, she is in control of the gaze, watching Norman, and then that shifts, as we'll see as we...
No, stop raining.
Eating in an office is just too officious. I have the parlor back here.
All right.
See, Norman is observed. You have the emphasis placed here on Marion's looking, just as it was on Jimmy Stewart in Rear Window and in Vertigo. She is the one here who is doing the looking, the subject of the gaze. What she sees in this shot exchange shot, she looks, she sees the bird, you go back to her looking. It constantly puts her in the position of the one who is looking.
Sit down.
Thank you.
Now observe how all the niceties and conventions of politeness are observed here as we enter the pleasure of conversation. Come in, sit down, thank you.
You're very kind.
It's all for you. I'm not hungry. Go ahead. You eat like a bird.
You eat like a bird is the beginning of what I'm going to describe a little bit later as the off-centeredness of Norman's speech. There's a particular pleasure he takes in saying she eats like a bird, and it's magnified by, of course, the fact that we've just seen all the dead birds, and look at all the birds in this shot, all the birds around him. So already what's happening is that the words Norman is using are being made more full of connotations by the visual presentation of what's happening.
You'd know, of course.
No, not really. Anyway, I hear the expression eats like a bird. It's really a falsity. Because...
And then in this wonderful performance by Anthony Perkins, you have what I call Norman's Speakch, his inability to formulate certain words, to stutter, to stumble over words, is already showing that he's not quite fully in place when he's speaking. You know, there's something disturbed and disruptive in this.
Birds really eat a tremendous lot. But I don't really know anything about birds. My hobby is stuffing things. You know, taxidermy. And I guess I'd just rather stuff birds because I hate the look of beasts when they're stuffed. You know, foxes and chimps. Some people even stuff dogs and cats, but oh, I can't do that. I think only birds look well stuffed because they're...
Well, you can see Marion is getting another fantastic performance, is getting a little uncomfortable as Norman talks about his hobby, not liking to stuff beasts, but being happy enough to stuff birds. And I mean, just look at that wonderful expression on her face of a slight guardedness has entered what started off as, you know, just a simple, polite exchange of pleasantries and trivialities.
Kind of passive to begin with.
It's a strange hobby.
And she tries to normalize things by saying, oh, that's a strange hobby. She doesn't realize just how strange it is.
Curious.
Uncommon, too.
Oh, I imagine so.
And Norman's reply, again, is it's not quite right. Strange, it's a strange hobby. And uncommon, too, Norman says so proudly. This is a conversation which has something going on under the surface of Norman's.
And it's not as expensive as you'd think. It's cheap, really. You know, needles, thread, sawdust. The chemicals are the only thing that cost anything.
A man should have a hobby.
And that's an example of, you know, what you call too much detail. You know, the needles, the threads, the chemicals. It's just a little odd. Of course, it's also wonderfully funny, and Hitchcock himself thought of Psycho as well as being a terrifying film, as being an extremely humorous film. And we know, of course, that humor and fear and terror are often closely aligned, as humor tries to put away the fear.
Well, it's more than a hobby. A hobby's supposed to pass the time, not fill it.
Is your time so empty?
And here we have what I'm calling the transition from the exchange of a casual exchange of pleasantries to the entry into intimacies, as when she asks, "Is your time so empty?" That is sort of going much deeper than ordinary chit-chat allows. It's a personal question.
No. Well, I run the office and tend the cabins and grounds and do little errands for my mother. The ones she allows I might be capable of doing.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
And again, you can see how Marion feels this is getting a little bit odd. Just that response to his statement, a boy's best friend is his mother. There's something not quite right here.
You've never had an empty moment in your entire life, have you?
Only my share.
Where are you going?
And now Norman begins to ask the questions, and his gaze to become dominant in the exchange.
I didn't mean to pry.
I'm looking for a private island.
What are you running away from?
Why do you ask that?
No. People never run away from anything. The rain didn't last long, did it? I think that we're all in our private traps, clamped in them, and none of us can ever get out. We scratch and claw, but only at the air, only at each other. And for all of it, we never budge an inch.
Sometimes we deliberately step into those traps.
I was born in mine. I don't mind it anymore.
Oh, but you should. You should mind it.
Oh, I do, but I say I don't.
I do, but I say I don't. It's a contradiction, and it's what in psychoanalytic terminology you might call a key example of the splitting of the subject in the process of defense, the title of Freud's final unfinished paper, going back to his own beginnings when he studied the defense neuroses. Norman is displaying his divisions, his splitness, and underneath his words with the references to the dead, to the bodies and so on, the desperation, the seething violence that's happening underneath the surface of what he's saying and behind his smile.
You know, if anyone ever talked to me the way I heard, the way she spoke to you.
Sometimes when
And here you have a big shot change as you see Norman from below, giving him more dominance, and now also beginning to turn the tables on Marion as he becomes dominant in this exchange of gazes. So let's just run through what we've seen again in shots 3 to 6. You see how Hitchcock deliberately positions Marion as in control, as in charge, as the subject of the gaze, partly through the emphasized point of view shots of the bird. Shot 3 is a medium shot of Marion looking into the parlour. Shot 4 is Marion's point of view, seeing a medium close-up of a stuffed owl. Shot 5 is as shot 3. Shot 6 is Marion's point of view, a medium close-up of a stuffed raven. And so the sequence progressive until at shot 80, the camera setup shifts quite dramatically when you look at it, in focus, when Marion suggests mother should be put someplace. From then on, Marion becomes the object of Norman's, and in the case of shot 112, mother's point of view. And the sequence closes with a real display of that reversal in the roles, with Norman watching Marion leaving the parlour, just as the sequence had begun with Marion watching Norman enter the parlour. The balance of power has, in a sense, shifted, as you'll see as we continue.
she talks to me like that, I feel I'd like to go up there and curse her and leave her forever. Or at least defy her. But I know I can't. She's ill.
She sounded strong.
No, I mean ill. She had to raise me all by herself after my father died. I was only 5, and it must have been quite a strain for her. She didn't have to go to work or anything like that. He left her a little money. Anyway, a few years ago, Mother met this man, and he talked her into building this motel. He could have talked her into anything. And when he died, too, it was just too great a shock for her. And the way he died. I guess it's nothing to talk about while you're eating. Anyway, it was just too great a loss for her. She had nothing left.
Except you.
A son is a poor substitute for a lover.
Why don't you go away?
To a private island like you?
And again, note the careful attention to the sort of misuse of language. As Norman says, a poor son is a substitute for a lover. It suggests too much of an identification of the son with the father.
No, not like me.
I couldn't do that. Who'd look after her? She'd be alone up there. The fire would go out. It'd be cold and damp like a grave. If you love someone, you don't do that to them even if you hate them. You understand? I don't hate her. I hate what she's become.
And again, through the lens of psychoanalytic theory, what could be more ambivalent or betraying ambivalence than Norman's description of his feelings towards his mother? He hates her, he doesn't hate her, he loves her. Well, he hates what she's become. It's very mixed up.
I hate the illness.
Wouldn't it be better if you put her someplace?
Sorry, this is the real shot in which Norman's gaze becomes dominant. You'll see it's in much closer focus. It's moved from a medium close-up to a close-up proper. His body comes forward. It's a steely gaze, if you like, and he now, the dynamic is now completely reversed.
You mean an institution? A madhouse?
Whereas her position is, she's being looked down at now. She's lost her initial position as the subject of the gaze. She's become the object of his gaze.
People always call a madhouse someplace, don't they? Put her in someplace.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound uncaring.
What do you know about caring? Have you ever seen the inside of one of those places? The laughing and the tears. And the cruel eyes studying you. My mother there. But she's harmless. She's as harmless as one of those stuffed birds.
I am sorry. I only felt... It seems she's hurting you. I meant well.
People always mean well. They cluck their thick tongues and shake their...
And again, with this attention to language, where Norman says, yes, people always mean well. To mean well is one of those phrases that are used in and about conversation. Conversation is about meaning well. It's about making yourself comfortable with somebody else, making that other person comfortable with you, emphasizing a shared world, emphasizing a certain closeness and conviviality. But if that begins to fracture, then, if you heard it, somehow people become like birds. They begin to cluck. Let's just go back and hear that maybe.
laughing and the tears and the cruel eyes studying you. My mother there. But she's harmless. She's as harmless as one of those stuffed birds.
I am sorry. I only felt... It seems she's hurting you. I meant well.
People always mean well. They cluck their thick tongues and shake their heads and suggest, oh, so very delicately. Of course, I've suggested it myself. But I hate to...
And again, the humorous but also rather frightening ambivalence and reversal. Of course, I suggested exactly the same thing myself, having just torn apart anybody who would suggest such a thing as putting his mother away.
Even think about it. She needs me. It's not as if she were a maniac, a raving thing. She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you?
Yes. Sometimes.
And with that appeal to a we all go a little mad sometimes, haven't you? Norman, in his own way, tries to bring the conversation away from the depths of self-revelation that he's been touching on and back into a more normal and more superficial register, which Marion is quite grateful for and turns her attention to her own problems.
Just one time can be enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman.
And there you have, again, the raison d'etre of conversation. Thank you, says Marion. Thank you, Norman, says Norman. The idea of conversation is to put people together, to help them identify each other, for them to feel secure with each other. But from the depths of association, of death, dissolution, and madness, which Norman has brought into the conversation, it's hardly a comforting conversation, even as he tries to get back to the polite formalities.
Norman.
Oh, you're not going back to your room already?
I'm very tired. And I'll have a long drive tomorrow, all the way back to Phoenix.
Really?
I stepped into a private trap back there, and I'd like to go back and try to pull myself out of it. Before it's too late for me, too.
Are you sure you wouldn't like to stay just a little while longer? Just for talk?
Oh, I'd like to, but...
All right. Well, I'll see you in the morning. I'll bring you some breakfast, all right? What time?
Very early. Dawn.
All right, Miss...
Crane.
Crane, that's it.
Good night.
And that's what I mean by the mother's viewpoint. Suddenly, Marion is seen not from Norman's viewpoint, as you've had in this, very ordinary shot exchange shot, well, not very ordinary conversation. Suddenly she's seen from somewhere else. And that, of course, is the perspective of, in a sense, the mother, or the creature inside Norman, who's now spotted her crime. She signed the register, not as Marion Crane, but under an assumed name. And now she becomes the object of Norman's gaze, as you can see. You see Norman watching Marion leave the parlour, just as at the beginning Marion had watched Norman entering the parlour, the balance of power has shifted. Just to go back over some of those things in the conversation, you have just the polite niceties of, oh, it's stopped raining, just a sort of thing that Jacobson mentioned in his analysis of Holderlin. Conversation is made up in part of deictic sentences. There's a lot of emphasis played on the this is here, this is now. And he actually even uses the example of a phrase like, it's stopped raining. As you know, often conversations on the telephone with relatives or on Skype with relatives and things will often ask about the weather. It's just a way of locating yourself in the real world with the person you're talking to, even if they are far away. But Norman's reply to that, already the stammering is betraying something about his not being quite properly in place in language. Eating in an office is just too officious. I have the parlour right back here. Okay, come into my parlour, said the spider to the fly. May well be the reference. Again, look at those little phrases I mentioned before. Sit down, you're very kind. These things that put people in a safe relation to each other. But then as they talk, how that becomes, as it can do in real life, of course, as well, move from the empty talk of polite chit-chat to an actual engagement with the person, a sharing of thoughts and intimacies and the real self. A man should have a hobby. Well, says Norman, it's more than a hobby. A hobby's supposed to pass the time, not fill it. Is your time so empty? Well, that is, as it were, a leading question. It's an intimate question. It's showing the progress of the conversation from the superficial exchange of politeness to some kind of intimacy. Though an intimacy which proves to be extremely disturbing. And Norman, gets particularly annoyed over the question of whether to put his angry mother someplace. And here, even in that phrase, someplace, you have the constant desire of conversation to iron out any kinks, to go for comfort, often to not be explicit because that could be too disturbing for someone, but to talk around it, something that Norman gets really angry about. Someplace, people always call a madhouse someplace, don't they? Put her in someplace. And with that precision to the attention to the detail of signification in cinema, it's at that point that a new, more disturbing music comes into the soundtrack. I'm sorry, says Marion, I didn't mean to seem uncaring. What do you know about caring? And then Marion's phrase, which, as I say, kind of sums up what conversation is really about, in a sense, is I meant well. So much of conversation is phatic, as linguists have often observed. It's not really about communicating facts. It's just showing that you're there. You mean well without having to mean anything in particular. You just show your availability and openness to conversation. But Norman gets angry and becomes himself now the dominating partner in the conversation. Well, they do try and get back to, as I said, they do try and get away from those depths full of decayed bodies and madness and violence, as Norman tries to retrieve the comforting space of conversation by using the pronoun we, you and I, we all go a little mad sometimes, smiles, and then asks a direct question, bringing Marion back into back into the comfort of a conversation. Haven't you? Yes, she replies, sometimes just once is enough. Thank you. Thank you, Norman. And again, that underlining of the primal urge of conversation to identify people safely and securely in relation to one another. And then if you just watch that sequence again, you'll see that underlying the whole conversation is something peculiar and so brilliantly acted by Anthony Perkins, something really peculiar about what I call Norman's speech. Norman's speech, his speaking, his inability to really be comfortable in language, bespeaking that kind of distortion in the personality which we began by discussing in relation to the great German poet Holderlin. Norman isn't fully assimilated to the structure of speaking and conversation. He stutters over key words, officious, falsity. More important, there's the gradual build-up of a range of extremely disturbing associations with the words he uses, the images he creates. There are bodies, there are corpses, there's passivity associated with that, there are greys, and finally there's taxidermy. And then the key phrase, a boy is a poor substitute for a lover. And then, you know, kind of showing how deep this not being in place goes. You have Norman's, what I call Norman's splitting ambivalences. I was born into my trap. I don't mind it anymore. Oh, but you should. Well, I do, but I say I don't. So again, just a complete contradiction of the self, a splitting of the subject. And later, with regard to putting his mother into some place, into an institution, of course I suggested it myself, but I hate to even think about it. So a massive state of denial in Norman. And as I said, these are all reasons why, although many would say that the most frightening sequence in the film is a sequence which follows the famous shower sequence where Marion is attacked and murdered in the shower. I'd say that actually this sequence is one of the most frightening in the film, but obviously in much more subtle ways, rather than showing or hinting at the cutting of the knife into the body. Here we have a psychic cutting and mutilation, the severing of Norman from the full speech of ordinary social interaction, and just how frightening that is when you're talking to someone and suddenly you realize, although they're in the same room as you, they're not really sharing the same space. They may be full of violence. It's very disturbing when that happens, as you may well know from your own experience. Okay, so as I said, you know, as we've gone on this week, what I felt you might get more out of as we go along, as we went along, was instead of talking generally about the films and our memories of the films and the meanings we can get from thinking about that as we talk and discuss, was to gradually introduce you to some of that detailed attention to the film text, which, through the miracle of video, first video, then DVD, and now streaming, which has this fantastic thing. You can really look at films and see the artistry with which they were put together, and as you do that, also be able to see just how much work has gone into them. And thinking of that work that goes into them, I wanted to make a couple of closing things. Hitchcock's own sense of why he needed to be so controlling. What others noticed in his work was, he was very controlling. People were enacting his fantasies. And Hitchcock put it so well himself in his discussion with Truffaut. I'm full of fears, and I do my best to avoid difficulties and any kind of complications. I like everything around me to be clear as crystal and completely calm. I get a feeling of peace from a well-organized desk. When I take a bath, I put everything neatly back in place. You wouldn't even know I'd been in the bathroom. So, on the one hand, very familiar to people, sort of obsessive compulsive disorder, this coming from anxiety, this need to try and control the world lest it attacks you, or rather something in you explodes and attacks the world. And in the Hitchcock film, that is so beautifully registered in the length of time and detailed attention given to Norman cleaning up the bathroom after the horrendous murder of Marion. You can look at that. It's about 50 minutes into the film to see Hitchcock almost poking fun at his own obsession with order and neatness. All these things about the psychology, the deep psychology of what can go on behind ordinary conversation, of course, really animated all the movies. Is the ordinary real as safe as we like to think it is? Well, Hitchcock's perpetual placing under strain ordinary people who find out the world isn't as safe and secure, isn't what it is rehearsed endlessly in the films. And indeed, in the later film Frenzy, kind of remake of Psycho, or a similar kind of thing, one man in the film warns his companion that psychotic murderers appear as ordinary, likable adult fellows, but emotionally they remain as dangerous children whose conduct may revert to a primitive, subhuman level at any moment. And that, of course, is quite important for understanding what happens in the films, but also what happens perhaps in Hitchcock. We haven't gone into any real details of Hitchcock's life and his own obsessions, but it's as well to acknowledge that Hitchcock seemed to become actually more and more disturbed himself as he got older, and his assaults on the actress Tippi Hedren, both in The Birds and in Marnie, which are there in the film, were accompanied, according to Tippi Hedren herself, by him trying to coerce her into intimate relations with him on several occasions. Much of this is caught in I think, an image of Hitchcock from another actress who observed him while working with him, at the British actress Anne Todd in the film, I think, Blackmail. Hitchcock, she said, was a very complex man, an overgrown schoolboy, really, one who never grew up and lived in his own special fantasy world. He had a schoolboy's obsession with sex that went on and on in a very peculiar way. But I think he was really a very sad person. I feel he wanted to be what he was not, a good-looking man like Cary Grant. And that's, a kind of insight into Hitchcock and his films. But I just wanted to balance that with, you don't want to go too far and say, well, look, all these films are just the output of a very unhappy person and also rather a disturbed person at some level. What you also want to be aware of is what Hitchcock was well aware of, that in a sense what he was doing in cinema was what was happening in culture broadly after the advent of Freud's theories. At the center of these theories lay the insight that the normal is really composed of a spectrum which runs from the normal to the abnormal. Every normal person has within him or herself traces of the infantile dispositions which, if they take over from childhood into adulthood, become the psychotic, the murderous, the violently libidinal, and so on. But those things are a part of the normal person, just that they've been mastered through conversation and socialization and not been allowed to take over. And all the murderers and murder cases that Hitchcock was obsessed with were really about people whose shared impulses with everyone, but those impulses took over in ways which conversation, society, and socializing usually disallow. Similarly, we mustn't make the mistake that Marcel Proust spotted in one of the great critics of his time, Sainte-Beuve, to mistake the man for the work. There has to be a certain independence with which you look at the work, as Proust put it, regarding in particular the image of Baudelaire, who we mentioned before. We mentioned Poe, and with Poe there's Baudelaire. The man who lives in the same body with any great genius has little connection with him, but he it is who intimates know, so it's an absurd to judge the poet by the man. As for the man himself, he is only a man, and may be utterly ignorant of what the poet who dwells in him wants. Here, Proust insists on not reducing art to the lives of the people who produce it, but to shift our attention and focus firmly onto the body of the work, which, when you do that, seems to be, you can recognize a tremendous amount of work and genius that goes into artistic objects, and looking at that is in the end much more interesting than looking at the biographical reduction. So thought Proust, and something to bear in mind when thinking of the complexity of Hitchcock. Anyway, these are all issues which we could discuss at much greater length. It's been nice to have this chance to talk what can I say, talk at you really for a week, not really talk with you, but thanks for the people who have spoken and the little bits of exchange we have been able to have. As I was saying to Norman, or as Norman was saying to me previous to the lecture, not Norman from Psycho, I don't think. Yeah, this online virtual discussion is a sort of pale imitation of doing something with a live audience, but I hope it's been satisfactory in some ways, even in this attenuated form. And I'm very grateful to have had this chance to think about Hitchcock, read a bit more, look at some of the films again, and try and put into words a few things that might help you enjoy and appreciate the films. So it's going to be farewell for now, and let's see if there's any questions or observations from anybody.
I would like to say that, can I just come in here? I would like to say that in spite of all challenges, this was a true highlight for me. And thank you very much.
No, thank you, Anne-Marie. I really appreciate your words, and I'm really glad you've got something out of it and enjoyed it. That's the goal. And go away and watch all those films. You're in lockdown. You've got a bit of time to watch them, I think.
Exactly. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
John, I just wanted to say, yeah, thanks, Sulega. You know, as you know, I'm in the UK, and I've wanted to attend the summer school for years, but of course, geographically, it's been not been possible. So I do agree that it's a pale imitation of you know, being in situ with you in Cape Town. But it is, you know, for those of us who are overseas, and there are at least 2 of us on this, you know, perhaps 3 on this in this course, it's been a wonderful way for us to stay connected to the university, and to, you know, and to participate in the summer school. And I think perhaps going forward, you know, far be it from me to dictate what UCT does, but, you know, it would be nice to offer it as an, you know, not as an alternative, but as an addition, so that those of us who are overseas can still stay connected to the university through some way other than just giving money or whatever we do in our own private, you know, capacities. So thank you, and to Zulega, for everybody for putting this on. It's been absolutely fantastic, you know. For me, the first time, well, I did it in June with Hedley Twiddle, but the first time in 25, 30 years that I've been able to do it. And it's really made me feel much more connected again to UCT.
Oh, well, thank you, Alan. And I think, you know, we'll think about, Zuleika and I and others will think about what you've had to say. And I think maybe we could find ways of trying to connect with alumni. I presume you're an alumni.
Yeah, indeed.
And, you know, and those overseas to get involved, as, you know, for all the, I suppose, insipidness of the virtual world, you know, on the other hand, it does allow this extraordinary intercontinental connection. I mean, that is to be valued. You know, so it's good and bad, isn't it? It's a bit weak, but it's strong in these ways of allowing this connection. Thank you, Alan.
Indeed. I mean, it's a pleasure. I mean, the Alumni Association does a great job. But you know, these kind of things, these courses, it's nice to be able to do it with UCT, other than, you know, through the Courtauld or something else in the UK. You know, because that really, for me, it's home. No matter where I am, it's still home, and it's nice to connect. So thank you.
Okay, bye.
Are there any other questions? There's a question in the chat from Kim.
Yeah, on the choice of black and white. Do you want to expand on that, Kim? Mm. Okay, well, yeah, Hitchcock, as he was, he'd also started a television, a weekly television series, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, short films of 40 minutes or so, which you can probably find online, and many of them are really good and interesting in their own right. And when he began making Psycho, he wasn't sure whether it would be a TV production or released in cinemas, and he made it actually with his TV team, and hence in black and white, as TV was black and white at the time. I think that's the answer.
Zuleika, I just want to know, when can we expect to receive the recorded lectures? During this week, we received recordings daily, as it went along. So when can we expect this series?
Well, let me see. It's now, it just finished. What we would prefer to do is to send the recordings all in once. But we also neglected to check with the lecturer. We need to check with John if it's okay for us to send the videos out to participants of the lectures.
Mm.
But we can do that later. But if all goes well, it shouldn't be too long. Yeah, with Microsoft Teams, it takes actually quicker because the videos are on this Microsoft Stream, and then we will just have to say, probably next week sometime, I think.
Okay. Thanks.
There's another check. Thank you. The series is, oh, okay.
So Adam, I see.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you as well, and it really has been an incredible pleasure to get to know these films a bit more, and to have, be able
Adam, I just want to show your face to John, seeing that you've asked so many questions. Maybe we can see you.
Hi, I'm Adam. Hi. I'm in London.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Nice.
I'm in London. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it's just been great to be able to sit here and to take part in this, and it's a bit colder here, but nevertheless, it's great. And I just thought it's been so great now to be able to look at Hitchcock and spot all these motifs, when I was going to ask about why this film was in black and white as well, but of course his next film was The Birds, so to have this sort of harbinger in these stuffed birds in Psycho was great to see. And having watched Rear Window as well, the openings I'm looking at very carefully now as well, and of course this one starts with a window as well, so that and you're led through a window into a hotel room, the kind of with the sort of activity that normally would go on in a hotel room, like somewhere like the Bates Motel. So it was really interesting to see the kind of intricacy of the way these things are all planned, and to get to look at them more closely. Really, really helpful. Thank you. Very, very much.
I mean, just adding to that, I mean, what really struck me this time, which hadn't struck me before, and it's because of this montage effect of placing one thing next to another. Having just watched Vertigo with its endless sequence of James Stewart in the car, and then with Psycho, the first part of the film, is very much her in the car, and it's kind of, I found that really interesting to see him playing with that again, as this time she is under the eyes of the policeman and law and order, and all her thoughts, which she isn't uttering, although she does utter them at times, you're made to feel them. I mean, what's really struck me in this thing is how consistently Hitchcock remained a silent film director. And I think that was also helped by, seeing the lodger first of all. I mean, he really does insist on the art of silent movie storytelling throughout his career.
And it being very detailed, and I love the fact that I'd forgotten completely, and the as it were, the pre-story is so elaborately told as well.
Yeah.
Before you get anywhere near the motel, you have this very elaborate series of events that are observed in great detail. I love the fact that the money has to go into a really, really the wrong envelope and all these things that happen. But the other thing I wanted to just mention was the precision of the conversation. In a lot of films, the dialogue overlaps a lot more. I was very struck by how when either Marion or Norman is speaking, you see them. You very little of that conversation overlaps on the listener, and that seemed to me to be very interesting and kind of characteristic of Hitchcock, that he wants you to take it all in. In other directors would stay on a character listening, for example, and that can be very powerful. But in this instance, it's very, very choreographed.
No, well, that's part of that. He really makes the conversations visual as well as oral by doing that, I think. And there's I mean, when he does look to the face for the effect of the words, because that isn't done regularly, it really emphasizes that something's happening or someone's responding. It's all very subtle, and it's really funny, isn't it? Because that is so standard, but and hundreds of TV series are filmed and films are filmed, and they don't really pay attention to those basic things. There's no artistry to them. It's just
That's great. Anyway, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Bye.
Okay. Bye, Adam.
Well, John, I would like to thank you for your very stimulating and interesting insight into Hitchcock, and I would like to thank the participants also. I think we have some noise in the background.
Yeah. No, thanks very much, everybody. It's really been a pleasure to talk, as I say, to talk at you, if not with you. And thanks, Zuleika and Lerato for, helping put it all together and helping me through my unfamiliarity with this medium. It wouldn't have been possible without your help. So thank you, everybody, and goodbye. Okay.
Hey, everybody. Goodbye.